Katie here. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be working on a black background and you get a 2-for. I'm going to use one stencil and I'm going to show you two techniques for working on a black background. Let's get going. So I've applied to this 5x7 canvas board a coat of TCW black gesso. And that gives a very matte finish. You can use black acrylic paint, but that might have a bit of a sheen to it. Not good or bad, just a different reality. Now, I absolutely love this brand new TCW stencil. It's called Sunflower Spray. And as soon as I saw it, I wanted to use it. And so today is the day. Now, I wanted to attempt to use the technique of keeping colors bright on a black background. And that's what you see me doing here. I'm masking off a part of the stencil that I am not going to use, and then I'm taping it down just to prevent it from moving ever so slight because the canvas board is not flat. There's a bit of a bump and a ridge, and I don't want it to shift. This is also called, I call it this reversing the stencil technique. So now I'm taking white gesso on a makeup sponge. Can you see that? That was really globby paint. I put them on the makeup sponge and then I pat it down on my work surface. You want this fairly dry, and I will be applying several layers of this white gesso. This is why I don't want the stencil to move, because I want to get this as crisp as possible. And I don't want it to seep underneath the stencil. So this was a bit of a try. I wasn't sure if reversing the stencil technique was going to work with the smaller scale openings. But spoiler alert, it totally works. So I let it dry in between, and then I'm adding another layer. And I do come back with some extra thick gesso, and I sponge it too, and that just added some texture. I had taken off the stencil to let it dry, and I washed the stencil. Now I'm placing that stencil back on as closely as I can, attaching the tapes, and now I'm ready to add color. I'm using yellow oxide, orange, quinacridone magenta, cadmium yellow as well. Just a combination of colors. I think I also use burnt sienna. And I'm going to blend those straight on the makeup sponge as I apply it to the white part. So I'm just building up layers, and I want highlights and lowlights. And this technique and the way we're doing it is going to allow me to get all that pretty effortlessly. It's a little bit of a cheater way of accomplishing this. Now, when I'm doing this, it's a little like flying blind, in that you can't, I mean, I could be lifting up the stencil and seeing how it looks, but I tend not to do that because it's hard always to get it perfectly lined up. The more times you lift it, the more chance that you've misaligned it. So I'm just going for it. Every time I do this, I always have that same fear that how is it looking? How, I don't know. But when I lift that stencil, I'm always happy with the results. So you got to trust the process and just go for it. Worst case scenario, you can apply a coat of paint and redo it. Here I'm adding some orange, and you're going to see how I'm just making different colors and putting it on different parts of that stencil. And again, I'm being very careful. I'm not putting a lot of paint on the makeup sponge, and I am patting off on my glass tabletop. My whole tabletop is a sheet of glass, so I have lots of surface to pat off on. Here I'm using the burnt sienna and adding that color. Lately I've just been, crazy about sunflowers um, in my home decor. So these are 5x7 canvas boards, and I'll put a magnetic sheet on the back and turn them into a magnet, or they could be displayed on an easel. They can also be popped into a standard frame. Just pop up the glass and you're good to go. So I'm doing the other one and I'm adding some yellow, and here I'm adding quinacridone magenta. I want this one to be more pink and burgundy-ish. And again, I'm mixing the multiple colors on there. And the thick gesso that I sponged through is giving the sunflower a little bit of texture. And you just go over it as many times until you get the color and depth that you want. So this is an example of using the 16.5 by 6-inch sign stencil, not for a sign. I'm using it on a 5x7. Now I'm just adding some green, and I'm mixing yellow in there to bring the tones that I have on the sunflowers, on the leaves. And then I just add more green to build up the color. This really couldn't be easier. So the moment of truth. Love it. Now, do you see where the white is? I love that. It is absolutely perfect. It's like highlights without having to do anything. Win. So now I'm going to do another one, but this time I'm going to add a fair bit of texture because I'm going to use TCW Stencil Butters. Now these are a little thinner than modeling paste, thicker than thick gesso. They spread like butter and they blend wonderfully well. And I'm using fuchsia and marigold and gamboge, and I'm mixing them a little bit on the glass mat, as you see me there, and then a little bit more when I apply it with a key card. These are pearlized and shimmery, and they add texture, and they show up so incredibly well on a black background. Just the perfect amount of contrast. And I have found my best success with applying the butters is using a key card, as you see me doing here. This is gamboge, it's yellow. I'm adding a little bit of pink in that, or a little bit of orange, just to change the tone. And sometimes you get these little stripes in there. You can also change or alter the color of the stencil butters by adding acrylic paint. That may take away some of the shimmer and shine, but it totally works. Now, TCW just released a brand new stencil butter. This is champagne gold, and I'm using that in the center. And here I'm doing it with a palette knife because it's a very, very small area, and I figure I can have the control there. Now, after I've put gesso through the stencil or the stencil butters, I do clean the stencils. It's really important because that will stick to it and it will wreck your stencils in time if you don't. So I did take the time. So here I'm mixing a little bit of ocean blue with the yellow and the orange to make varying shades of green, and that's what I'm using for the leaves. If I didn't want to get as much texture, I could have sponged these colors onto through the stencil as I did the acrylic paint, and it would give a little bit different texture than with the acrylic paint. Yum! Look at that shimmer and shine. So I chose the saying, choose to shine, and I'm using my wooden blocks, alphabet blocks, and gold paint. And I'm just spreading the gold paint on my glass top table. Now I stamp out the sentiment that I want on paper first, just to get the appropriate placing, just so I know exactly, just so I know peace of mind wise that I have enough room. I stamp it in the acrylic paint and then I stamp it on the background. And I'm using the baby wipe to clean off the acrylic stamp. I'm not trying to make this perfectly straight. I'm not trying to make it all on one line. I've embraced the imperfection of using letter alphabet stamps, and I absolutely love it. Whenever I'm doing a canvas, that's my go-to. If you get some on the backing, you can take it off. I will go and touch that up with another little dab of the black gesso. I'm spreading a gold acrylic paint and going. For the rest of the video, I do the same thing, a different sentiment with the second project. I don't show all the work that I do because a lot of it's very similar. And that's time that you can be in your craft room creating. Choose to shine. Oh, I absolutely love this piece. If you don't want to do this on a canvas panel, you can totally do this on an art journal page. 5x7, 7x10, 8x10, it'll all work really, really well. So that one is done. So now I'm grabbing my blending foam and I'm going to edge the canvas panel with gold. It just seems to go with everything else that's going on here. And since the canvas panel can be displayed on a little mini easel, or it could just sit on a ledge, it may not, you may see that. And that just adds a nice little frame around your finished project. Normally I edge with black, but when it's a black background, I'm choosing the gold. So for the other one, I chose a slightly different sentiment, grow, bloom, shine. And again, I stamped it out with my archival ink on papers just to make sure I have enough room. That little step has probably saved me numerous times. Because if I just wing it, I inevitably end up with too little space. And this just keeps me balanced. You can just see the difference between the two panels, the shimmer that is in this one. But the other one has the white highlights. Which one do you like best? If you buy a frame for this 5x7, you can have different 5x7s on the canvas panels for different seasons, and then you can just use the same frame. Pop out one, put in the next one. And then I'm going to edge it with gold as I did the other one. And I did go over it. I edged it with one layer of gold, let it dry, came back and did a second layer. Now I'm just adding a little bit of shading. I'm going in with a variety of colors. I'm using the burnt sienna here. I'm using some black, and I do this on both of the panels, although you're only going to see me doing it on this one. And I'm just adding a little bit more interest, a little more depth. And I just look and see, which one do I want to do? How am I going to change this up? There, I think I switched to burnt sienna. And I do this on the Stencil Butters too. You can put acrylic paint on top of them and add shading and highlights, even though it's a stencil butter and not just acrylic paint. So that's good to know. Here I'm adding black. So I've added some little bit more pink to make it darker, a little bit more rich. I do come back into frame in a bit. Sorry about that. I'm just looking from afar, and deciding, are you done or does it need more? As I said, then I go and I add the shading to the one with the stencil butters, but I didn't uh, save the footage of that. Now I have both of them, and I decide I'm going to splatter with gold paint. And that brings us to the end. So do you like the shimmery shine with the stencil butters, or do you like this one with the white highlights? Let me know. I hope you give both of these techniques, working on a black background, a try. Until next time, go get creative.